They all watched. Not one person stood up. A man in a $3,000 suit shoved a wheelchair sideways into the middle of the aisle, straightened his jacket, and walked out the front door without looking back, leaving the woman sitting there alone, caught between the sound of rain hammering the windows and the carefully averted eyes of every stranger in the room. Nobody flinched, nobody spoke, nobody moved. Nobody except a 32-year-old delivery driver with worn-out boots, a 6-year-old daughter coloring quietly beside him, and exactly $11 left in his wallet until Friday. That one decision, to simply stand up, didn't just change 2 lives. It quietly changed thousands more. If this story moves you, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this one has traveled. Hit like, stay until the end, and let's begin. The rain started somewhere around 6 o'clock and didn't apologize for it. It came down hard and sideways, the kind that finds the gap between your collar and your neck, no matter how fast you walk, the kind that turns a parking lot into a shallow lake in under 20 minutes. By the time Nolan Hayes pulled his 2009 Civic into the gravel lot beside Patty's roadside diner on Route 9, his windshield wipers were losing the argument badly, and his left shoe had been leaking since Tuesday. He sat in the car for a moment with the engine idling, staring at the neon open sign buzzing orange through the downpour. It flickered once, twice, held. "Daddy, I'm hungry," Sophie said from the back seat. "I know, baby." My tummy made a noise. I heard it. It made it again. Nolan turned around. Sophie was sitting with her knees pulled up, her sketchbook balanced on top of them, a stubby green crayon working its way across a page in the dark. She had her mother's dark eyes, wide, watchful, not missing a thing. She was 6 years old and already had the focused expression of someone twice that age. "Can we go in?" she asked without looking up. "Yeah." Nolan cut the engine. "Let me get the umbrella." There was no umbrella. He'd left it at the Kellerman delivery on Ashford Street 2 weeks ago and kept forgetting to replace it. He grabbed his jacket from the passenger seat, held it over Sophie's head as they ran for the entrance, and arrived at the door with his shirt soaked through and Sophie's hair more or less intact. She didn't notice either way. She was already studying the handwritten specials board through the glass. "They have grilled cheese," she announced. "Good eyes." "And tomato soup. Can I have both?" Nolan held the door open. "We'll see." Inside, Patty's was the kind of place that hadn't changed its decor since 1987 and wore that fact like a badge of honor. Laminate countertops, spinning stools at the counter, 3 of them with duct tape repairs, a jukebox in the corner that hadn't worked since the second Obama administration but still got wiped down every morning, the smell of coffee and fried onions and something sweet, probably pie, sitting underneath everything else like a warm foundation. It was about half full on a rainy Wednesday, a couple of truckers at the counter, a family of 4 by the window, 2 kids fighting quietly over a phone, an older woman alone with a crossword puzzle and a cup of tea she kept wrapping both hands around. The low hum of other people's evenings, ordinary and comforting in the way only public spaces can be when you've been alone all day. Nolan steered Sophie toward a 2-top near the middle of the room. She climbed up onto the vinyl seat herself. She insisted on doing it herself, had been insisting for almost a year now, and immediately spread her sketchbook and 3 crayons out across the table like she was claiming territory. "You have to leave room for the food," Nolan said. "There's room." "Soph." She moved the crayons 4 inches to the left and looked at him like that settled it. A waitress materialized beside them, mid-50s, hair pinned up, name tag that said Donna in block letters. The slightly frayed energy of someone 4 hours into a double shift. "Hi there, sweetie," she said to Sophie. "What can I get you 2 to drink?" "Apple juice, please," Sophie said. "And my dad wants coffee, but he always says he doesn't need it, and then he gets tired later." Donna looked at Nolan. "Coffee," he said. "Please." "Smart kid." Donna wrote it down. When she left, Nolan unfolded the laminate menu even though he already knew what he could order. He'd been in here maybe 4 times over the years, always when he was doing a delivery nearby and needed something that wasn't a gas station sandwich. The specials were $7.50. The grilled cheese Sophie wanted was $4.95. The tomato soup was $2.25. He did the math with the automatic, practiced ease of someone who had been doing it for years. Not anxiously, just as a reflex. like checking your mirrors. He had $11 and some change. There'd be more Friday when the direct deposit cleared. Tonight there was $11. Grilled cheese and soup for Sophie. Coffee and the $4 blue plate. Eggs, toast, a side of hash browns. For him. That worked. That was fine. He was reading the back of the menu without really reading it when the door opened behind him and brought a gust of rain-cold air and a kind of disturbance he felt before he saw it. He turned. The man came in first, mid-40s, broad through the shoulders, wearing a charcoal suit that fit him the way expensive suits fit men who buy them regularly. His hair was dark and going silver at the temples in a way he'd probably decided was distinguished. He had the face of someone accustomed to being the most important person in whatever room he entered. Not cruel exactly, just settled into his own significance the way a stone settles into a riverbank. He held the door open, barely, with one hand, and the woman in the wheelchair came through the gap. She was managing it herself, pushing with both hands, navigating the small lip between the entrance mat and the floor. She was maybe 30, or close to it. Dark hair pulled back, a pale green blouse slightly damp at the shoulders where the rain had caught her, an expression of careful composure that Nolan recognized immediately because he'd worn it himself in different circumstances. The look of someone working very hard to make everything appear fine. They took a booth near the back. Nolan stopped watching. It wasn't his business. Donna came back with the coffee and apple juice, took their order. Yes, grilled cheese. Yes, tomato soup, the $4 blue plate, please, and disappeared again. Sophie went back to her drawing. The rain intensified outside, clattering against the roof in irregular bursts. Nolan wrapped his hands around the coffee mug and let himself be still for a few minutes, which was the closest thing to rest he'd managed all week. He'd had 4 deliveries that day, and the third one had involved 3 flights of stairs and a customer who'd wanted to argue about the weight of his own package. Before that, Nolan had spent the morning at Sophie's school for a parent-teacher meeting where her teacher, a kind woman named Ms. Alvarez, had told him Sophie was bright, focused, and had some difficulty with large group activities. She tended to go quiet and work alone. Nolan had nodded and said he understood. He did understand. He understood it completely. After Claire died, Sophie had gone very quiet for about 6 months. She was 3 then, too young to process it in language, so she processed it the way she could, in drawings, in colors, in the precise and careful world of her sketchbook. She'd gotten louder again gradually, the way kids do, but she kept the sketchbook. She always kept the sketchbook. He was thinking about that, about Ms. Alvarez's careful voice and the way Sophie had drawn a picture of herself at recess alone beneath a tree and colored the sun yellow with great deliberate strokes. When he heard the voice from the back booth, he didn't mean to hear it. The diner wasn't loud. "I don't understand why you didn't tell me." The man's voice. Contained but edged with something. Nolan looked down at his coffee. "I didn't think it was relevant," the woman said. Her voice was steady. Steadier than it probably felt, Nolan guessed. "Not relevant." A short exhale. Not quite a laugh. "Celeste, you're in a wheelchair." "I'm aware of that." "You were in a wheelchair when we had dinner last month, when we had dinner twice in February. You didn't think to mention, I use the chair intermittently. I walk with a cane on good days. I didn't mention it because it shouldn't matter, and I wanted to see if it mattered to you." A silence that said it mattered. Nolan watched Sophie draw. She was working on what appeared to be a horse, or possibly a very large dog, with orange flames coming out of its hooves. He didn't ask. She had her own internal logic. "I've been straightforward with you about everything," the man said, quieter now, which somehow made it worse. "I thought you were being straightforward with me." "I was. I am. My mobility situation has nothing to do with who I am." "I'm not saying it does." "Then what are you saying, Richard?" Another silence, longer. "I'm saying," he said slowly, "that I need some time to think about whether I can do this." Nolan pressed his lips together and looked at the table. "Whether you can do this," Celeste repeated, not a question, a transcript. "This isn't... I'm not trying to be cruel. I just..." Richard's voice lowered further, and Nolan caught only fragments now, deliberate fragments, the man making himself quieter as though that adjusted the content of what he was saying. Something about lifestyle. Something about long-term. Something about not being prepared. Then the sound of the booth seat. Movement. The specific small commotion of someone gathering their things. Richard. Her voice stayed even. That was the thing Nolan kept noticing, how even it stayed. You don't have to do this here. I'll call you, he said. Don't. Footsteps. The bell above the door, cold air, rain, then nothing except the jukebox that didn't work and the weather outside and the ordinary sounds of other people eating their ordinary meals in a warm room while a woman in a booth near the back sat very still in a way that took real effort to maintain. Sophie looked up from her drawing. Daddy, she said, not quietly. Yeah. That man left that lady. I know. By herself. I see that. Sophie looked at the back booth, looked at Nolan, and went back to her drawing with the serious expression of someone who has registered a fact and is now filing it. Nolan drank his coffee. He looked out the rain-streaked window where Richard's taillights, some kind of German sedan dark-colored, had already been swallowed by the downpour. He looked at the back booth, where Celeste was sitting with her hands folded on the table and her eyes focused on something at medium distance, the specific look of someone keeping themselves from the edge of something by sheer will. He looked at Sophie. He looked at his coffee cup. He picked it up, stood up, and walked to the back booth. He stopped at a reasonable distance, not too close, so she'd have the option of looking through him if she wanted to. Excuse me, he said. She looked up. Her eyes were dark brown and sharper than he expected. Not the soft, unfocused look of someone mid-cry, but the clear, slightly wary look of someone who had not yet decided how they felt and wasn't going to perform it either way. There were no tears. He'd half expected tears. I'm sorry to interrupt, Nolan said. My daughter and I are over there and we have a two-top, and she spreads her art supplies across the entire table, which leaves me basically nowhere to put my arms. So I was wondering if maybe we could join you. If you'd rather not, that's completely fine. I'll leave you alone. She looked at him for a long moment, not hostile, assessing. A two-top, she said. She's claimed most of it. How old? 6. Celeste looked past him towards Sophie, who had looked up at exactly the wrong moment and was now staring back with complete unself-consciousness, green crayon suspended in mid-air. Hi, Sophie called across the diner. A small thing happened at the corner of Celeste's mouth. Hi, she called back. She looked at Nolan again. All right, she said. He went back to the two-top, gathered their drinks and Sophie's extensive creative operation, and ferried everything over in 2 trips, while Donna watched from behind the counter with the patient amusement of someone who has seen every version of this kind of thing and decided long ago not to interfere. Sophie settled into the booth seat across from Celeste and spread her sketchbook back out, as though they had always been sitting here. I'm Sophie, she said. Celeste. That's a long name. It is, Celeste agreed. Yours is easier. I know. What's that mean, Celeste? Celestial. Like the sky. Sophie considered this with appropriate gravity. Mine just means Sophie. Sophie's a good name. My mom picked it. She said it the way kids say things that are important to them, matter-of-factly, without drama, right in the open. She's not here anymore. A beat. Nolan saw Celeste register it, the very slight shift in her expression, not pity, but something more careful than that. I'm sorry, Celeste said. It's okay. I was little. I mostly remember her smell. Sophie turned the sketchbook around. Do you want to see my horse? Celeste looked at the drawing, the creature with the orange hoof flames, ears at unusual angles, eyes that were perhaps more expressive than anatomically standard. She looked at it with genuine attention. Is it a fire horse? She asked. She's a fire horse, Sophie corrected. Her name is Cinders. Why does she have fire hooves? So she can run fast in the snow without getting stuck. Celeste nodded slowly. That's actually really smart. Sophie appeared to appreciate this. She pulled the book back and kept drawing. Nolan set his coffee down. I'm Nolan, he said. I'm sorry about... He gestured generally in the direction of the door. Don't be, Celeste said. It's not your fault. I know, No one should have to sit through that in public. She was quiet for a moment. Everyone else in here did a very good job of looking at their plates. Yeah. He wrapped his hands around his mug. Sorry about that, too. She studied him, still with that clear, slightly measuring look. Why did you come over? He thought about it honestly before answering. Because you were alone and it seemed like you probably didn't want to be. And because my daughter makes it physically impossible to use my half of our table. Celeste looked at Sophie, who was now adding what appeared to be a rider to Cinder's the fire horse. The rider had very large hair. That part, I believe, Celeste said. Something loosened slightly around both of them, the way the pressure adjusts when a window gets cracked in a too-warm room. Not dramatically, just enough. Us. Donna arrived with Nolan's blue plate and Sophie's grilled cheese and soup and added an extra paper menu for Celeste without being asked. Celeste ordered chamomile tea and a slice of whatever pie was fresh, and Donna said banana cream, which would do. What do you do? Celeste asked Nolan as he salted his eggs. Not in the cocktail party way, in the direct way of someone who has spent enough time around people who talk about what they do as a performance that the genuine version feels refreshing. Deliveries mostly, he said. Commercial courier, a few contracts with medical supply companies. I drive. All day? Usually about 8-9 hours. I work nights sometimes, too. I do furniture restoration on the side. She looked at his hands. He had the hands of someone who worked with them. A small scar along the left thumb from a routing incident 3 years ago, stain that didn't fully wash out under the nails, a callus below the right index finger from years of holding a sanding block. What kind of furniture? She asked. Old stuff mostly, things people throw out. I find them at yard sales, junk shops, chairs, tables, dressers. A few weeks ago, I did a 1940s secretary desk someone had painted over twice. Took 6 layers of paint off before I got to the original walnut underneath. Was it worth it? He thought about it. Yeah, not financially, but yeah. She had her tea now and was wrapping both hands around the mug the same way he was wrapping his around the coffee, and he noticed it, the small mirroring, but didn't say anything about it. What about you? He asked. Healthcare, she said, not elaborating. Okay. I'm in administration, management. She turned the mug slightly. It's a lot of meetings. You like it? Something complicated moved across her face. I used to love it. Now She stopped. It's complicated. The company grew faster than I expected. Things usually do, Nolan said. Either that or they don't grow at all, and that's a different problem. Exactly. She looked at him. That's exactly it. Sophie blew across her soup, dunked a corner of her grilled cheese in it with scientific precision, and took a bite. She chewed. She appeared satisfied with the results. This is good, she informed Celeste. I'm glad. Do you want some? I have pie coming. Pie is better, Sophie confirmed. She dunked another corner. Are you sick? She asked. My friend at school uses a chair and she has a disease. Sophie, Nolan said. It's fine, Celeste said. She looked at Sophie directly. I have something called multiple sclerosis. It affects my nerves and my balance. Some days I can walk with a cane. Other days the chair is safer. Sophie absorbed this. Does it hurt? Sometimes, not always. My dad has a bad back, Sophie offered in the spirit of reciprocal disclosure. He makes a sound when he stands up. I make a sound when I stand up now, Soph. Like an old door, Sophie said. Celeste smiled at that. A real one. The kind that gets to the eyes, not the careful, polite version she'd been maintaining since Nolan first saw her. It changed her face, that smile. Not in any dramatic, cinematic way. Just in the ordinary way that a real smile does when you've been holding something tight for a while and briefly let go. Old door, she repeated. Squeaky, Sophie confirmed, dunking her sandwich again. Nolan shook his head and ate his eggs and felt, for the first time since about 7 that morning, something that wasn't fatigue or forward momentum. Something quieter than that. They talked through the meal and past the end of it, not the kind of talking that fills silence, the kind that forgets there is silence. Celeste asked about Sophie's school, and Sophie described Ms. Alvarez's classroom in precise and affectionate detail, including the class guinea pig named Mr. President, who had an attitude problem. Nolan asked about Celeste's city. She said she lived in an apartment downtown, 32nd floor, that she'd gotten for practical reasons and stayed in for the view. He said he lived in a house, rented, that needed work, in a neighborhood that was fine, that he'd moved into after Claire died because he needed the space for Sophie and the garage for the furniture, and the landlord didn't mind either. She asked about the furniture again, and he talked about it more than he'd meant to, about what it felt like to sand something down to its original material, to discover what was underneath all the paint and wear, to clean the joints and reset them and watch something that had been discarded become solid again. He stopped himself. "Sorry, I go too long on that subject." "Don't apologize," she said. "It's interesting. People's eyes usually glaze over. My eyes aren't glazed." They weren't. She was watching him with the kind of attention that people give things they genuinely find interesting, not the polite simulation of it. Nolan had given enough of the polite simulation version himself over the years to recognize the difference. Sophie had finished her soup and was now working on what appeared to be a second drawing. A figure in a wheelchair beside a figure in boots, and a figure with very large hair, all of them under an orange sun. Nolan glanced at it and felt something shift in his chest that he chose not to examine too closely. Outside, the rain kept its word. It showed no signs of stopping or even reconsidering. The windows ran with it. The parking lot was a mirror. The bell above the door rang occasionally as people hurried in and out with that particularly defeated walk of people whose umbrella strategies had failed them. At some point, Donna came back to clear the plates and left the check. Nolan picked it up before Celeste could reach for it. "You don't have to do that," Celeste said. "I know. Seriously, please let me—" "It's okay." He said it simply, without ceremony, which closed the conversation without making a point of it. He went to the counter and paid cash. The $11 and the change that brought it to $11.42, which was enough, just. He left $2 on the table for Donna and came back and sat down, and Celeste was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Why did you do that?" she asked. He thought about it. "Because we were at the same table," he said. Seemed right. She was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to be honest with you," she said. "I don't meet a lot of people who don't have an angle." "That sounds exhausting." "It is," she said. "It's genuinely exhausting." He nodded. "I don't have one," he said. "I'm a delivery driver with a kid and $11 and some furniture in my garage. There's not a lot of angle available." She looked at him for a long second. Then she laughed. Surprised by it, he could tell, the way you sometimes laugh because a thing caught you off guard. $11, she repeated. "I get paid Friday." She shook her head slightly. Not at him. At something about the evening, at the specific shape of how it had gone. Sophie looked up. "Why is that funny?" "Sometimes the truth is funny," Celeste said. Sophie accepted this. "My dad says that too." She turned the sketchbook around and slid it across the table toward Celeste. "This is for you." Celeste looked at the drawing. The three figures under the orange sun, crayon careful, the lines slightly wobbly, with the concentrated effort of a 6-year-old hand. She looked at it for a long moment. "Can I keep it?" she asked. "It's yours," Sophie said. "I made it for you." "Thank you, Sophie." "You're welcome, Celeste." Sophie picked up her green crayon. "Your name is easier to draw than you think. It just takes a long time." Outside, the rain finally eased around 9 o'clock into something lighter. Still raining, but the kind of rain that has made its point and doesn't need to make it louder anymore. Celeste had called for her car early and now said it was waiting. Nolan held the door open. The car in the lot was a black SUV, an assistant he hadn't noticed on the way in now at the wheel, waiting with the engine running. Celeste navigated the entrance slip with the practiced economy of someone who has learned exactly how much force each obstacle requires and doesn't waste energy on any of it. At the edge of the awning, she stopped and turned. "Thank you," she said. "For—" She stopped and reconsidered. "For sitting down," she said. "Sure." That's rarer than it should be. He knew that was true. He'd seen the row of averted eyes in there. He'd felt the pull of it himself for about 30 seconds before Sophie had looked up from her drawing with that direct 6-year-old gaze. "Safe drive," he said. She looked at him for one more moment, the clear, watchful look, the one that didn't miss things. And then she turned and wheeled toward the waiting car. Nolan stood in the doorway for a second. Sophie pressed against his side, arm around his waist, watching the SUV pull out of the lot. "I like her," Sophie said. "Yeah?" "She listens." He put his hand on the top of her head, the way he did, the way that still sometimes stopped his breath for a second because of how much of Claire was in the shape of it. "Come on," he said. "Let's go home." The drive back was quiet, Sophie going soft and sleepy in the back seat, her sketchbook on her lap, the rain spotting the windows with the gentle irrelevance of weather that has already done whatever it was going to do. Nolan drove with the radio low and the heater on and thought about almost nothing, which was unusual for him, and which he recognized even then as some kind of gift. He wouldn't remember what song was playing. He wouldn't remember exactly what route he took home. What he would remember and would remember for a long time afterward was the specific quality of that hour, the strange, unearned lightness of it, and the way Sophie's voice had sounded when she said, "I like her." She listens. He pulled into the driveway. He got Sophie inside, boots off, teeth brushed, pajamas on, story read. He sat on the edge of her bed until her breathing evened out. Then he went down to the garage and turned on the lamp above his work table and stood for a while looking at the piece he was working on. A 19th century side table with 3 out of 4 original legs. The 4th replaced badly at some point with pine that didn't match. He'd found a replacement in a salvage shop last week that was close but not exact. He'd been letting himself get used to the idea of not exact. He turned the table around in the light, looking at the joints. Good bones. Somebody had built this to last, and it had lasted. It just needed someone to take the time. He picked up the sanding block and started working. Outside, the rain finished. The week after the diner, Nolan didn't think about Celeste Langford every day. That would be inaccurate and also unlikely, given that Sophie needed to be dropped at school by 7:40. The Medline contract required 3 hospital runs before noon on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and the side table with the mismatched 4th leg wasn't going to finish itself. He had a full life in the way that people who have no margin have full lives. Not full of pleasure or leisure, but full of the specific density of obligation that leaves you horizontal by 9:30 most nights, whether you meant to sleep or not. But he thought about her some. Not in any complicated way. More in the way you think about an unusual evening. The way a particular hour can stay with you, not because something dramatic happened, but because something felt briefly, unexpectedly real. He thought about the way she'd held her tea mug with both hands, the way she'd looked at Sophie's drawing like it was worth looking at, the way she'd said for sitting down like that was the whole of it. And it was. He didn't have her number. He didn't know her last name. He knew she was in healthcare administration and lived downtown on a high floor and had a black SUV with a driver, which was mildly unusual for an administrator, but not something he'd examined too closely at the time. He figured he wouldn't see her again, which was fine. Good things didn't have to continue in order to have been good. Sophie, however, had opinions. "Do you think Celeste liked my drawing?" she asked on Thursday morning, buckling her seatbelt with the laborious effort she still put into the chest clip. "I think she did. She asked to keep it." She could have been being polite. Nolan glanced in the rear view. "Where did you learn about being polite versus meaning it?" Ms. Alvarez says when people say interesting in a flat voice, they don't think it's actually interesting. Ms. Alvarez is correct. Celeste didn't say it in a flat voice. No, she didn't. Sophie nodded, satisfied, and looked out the window. He dropped her off, watched her march through the school doors with her backpack listing slightly to the left. She overpacked it, had to be reminded weekly, and then sat in the pickup lane longer than he should have before the car behind him tapped its horn gently, and he pulled back out into the morning. The Medline runs took until 1. In between deliveries, he ate a gas station sandwich in his car in a hospital parking garage on the 4th level and called his sister Renata in Pittsburgh, which he did most weeks when he had 15 minutes and a signal. Renata was 4 years older, worked in insurance, had 2 teenage boys who exhausted her with their constant aliveness, and was the only person in Nolan's life who had known Claire before and still talked about her in the present tense of memory. Not carefully, not with the hushed reverence people sometimes performed around grief, but naturally, the way you talk about someone who is real. "How's my girl?" Renata asked. "Good. She made a fire horse this week." "Obviously. What's its name?" "Cinders." "That's a great name. How are you?" "Fine." "Nolan." "I'm fine, Renata. I'm tired, which is different." "You're always tired." "I'm always tired," he agreed. "I met someone at a diner." A pause. The specific pause of an older sister recalibrating. "Okay. Not like that." "I didn't say anything." "I could hear you thinking it very loudly." "What happened?" Renata asked. He told her about the diner, about Richard and the suit and the door, about sitting down. He told it plainly, the way it happened. Renata listened without interrupting, which for her was an act of considerable restraint. "And?" she said when he finished. "And nothing. It was one dinner. I don't know where she lives. Not exactly. I don't have her number." "Did you want her number?" He watched a nurse cross the parking garage in scrubs, moving fast, coffee in one hand, badge in the other. "I don't know," he said honestly. "That's not a no," Renata said. "I know it's not a no." "Nolan." She said his name the way she had when they were kids, and he was about to do something she could already see the outcome of. "It's okay." "I know it's okay." "I mean, it's okay to want things. You're allowed." He didn't answer right away. Below the parking structure, a car alarm was going off on the street, irrelevant and insistent. He watched the light change at a yellow line on the concrete and thought about want, which was something he'd mostly reorganized his life to function without. "I know," he said finally. "I've got a delivery at 2. I'll call you Sunday." "Tell Sophie Aunt Renata says the fire horse needs a friend." "I'll tell her. She'll start designing it tonight." He hung up and ate the rest of his sandwich and then went back to work. He spent that evening in the garage until close to 11, fitting the replacement leg to the side table, checking the joint angles, clamping it, and leaving it. The fit wasn't perfect. You could see the difference in the grain if you knew what you were looking at. He'd decided to live with it. Sometimes the repair was visible, and that was just the history of the thing. He went inside, checked on Sophie, stood in her doorway for the 30 seconds he always stood in her doorway, and went to bed. His phone rang Saturday morning at 9:14, number he didn't recognize. "Is this Nolan Hayes?" The voice was professional, female, measured. "Yeah," he said, sitting up. "Who's this?" "My name is Andrea Reyes. I'm the executive assistant to Celeste Langford. Ms. Langford would like to invite you and your daughter to visit her company's offices next Saturday morning, if you're available." He held the phone and looked at the ceiling. "How did she find my number?" he asked. A brief pause, the kind that contains a smile. "Ms. Langford has access to considerable resources," Andrea said. "She asked me to assure you that there's no obligation involved in the invitation, and that she would completely understand if you'd prefer not to come." "What's the company?" he asked. Another pause, slightly longer. "Langford Health Technologies," she said. "Headquartered downtown." He knew the name. Anybody in the city who paid attention to business news knew the name. Langford Health Technologies was one of the fastest-growing healthcare tech companies in the country. Electronic records management, hospital logistics software, patient data infrastructure. He delivered to one of their satellite offices twice. He'd seen the logo on the side of a building on 5th. He sat with the phone pressed to his ear and said nothing for a moment. "She owns it," he said. Not a question. "Yes," Andrea said. He thought about the diner, the chamomile tea. The way she'd said, "I don't meet a lot of people who don't have an angle with a tiredness that was about more than that one evening. The way she'd held Sophie's drawing. "All right," he said. "Yeah, we'll come." He found out Sophie's opinion on the matter when he told her over breakfast. She stopped eating her cereal, spoon halfway to her mouth, and stared at him. "We're going to see Celeste?" she said. "Next Saturday." "At her job?" "Yeah." Sophie put the spoon down. "Is her job fancy?" "Probably." "Should I bring her another drawing?" He thought about it. "Yeah, I think she'd like that." Sophie picked up her spoon again with the purposeful energy of someone who now had a project. I'm going to draw cinders with a friend, she said. Aunt Renata said she needed a friend. She did say that. The friend will be a blue horse with ice hooves, so they balance out. That's good thinking. Together they can go anywhere, Sophie said. Fire and ice. He looked at his daughter across the breakfast table. The serious crayon-stained hands, the slightly too large pajama shirt with a faded rocket ship on it, the dark eyes that tracked everything, and felt the particular weight of loving someone small and completely. It was the heaviest thing he'd ever carried, also the only thing that made the carrying feel like a reasonable use of a life. Yeah, he said. Together they can go anywhere. That was Thursday. By Saturday, he had reconsidered the visit approximately 14 times, for reasons ranging from the practical — he owned exactly one collared shirt that didn't look like it had been lived in — to the more complicated territory he couldn't entirely map. He pressed the shirt on Friday night and told himself he was overthinking it, which was true, and didn't help, which was also true. He and Sophie arrived downtown at 9:45. The Langford Health Technologies building was glass and steel, 34 stories, a lobby that cost more to design than Nolan's annual salary. He knew this the way you know things when you're standing inside them, in the gut, in the particular way the quiet worked, the kind of quiet that requires significant investment to maintain. Sophie stood in the lobby with her backpack on and her sketchbook under her arm and tilted her head back to look at the ceiling, which was worth looking at, a latticework of steel cables and glass panels that let the morning light come through in angular columns. It's like a spaceship, she said. Little bit. A nice spaceship. Sure. Andrea Reyes met them at reception, early 40s, sharp but warm. The particular efficiency of someone who manages the calendar of someone very busy and has developed an entire personality around making that feel effortless. She shook Nolan's hand and crouched to Sophie's level. You must be Sophie, she said. Celeste told me about your drawings. Sophie adjusted her grip on the sketchbook. I brought a new one. She'll love that. Come on up. The elevator went to the 32nd floor, which matched the floor Celeste had said her apartment was on, and Nolan filed that coincidence away without comment. The 32nd floor of Langford Health Technologies opened into a wide, quiet hallway with a view of the city on three sides that was objectively extraordinary. Nolan didn't say so. Sophie did. I can see my school from here, she said, pressing her nose to the glass. Which direction? Andrea asked. That way. Sophie pointed with one decisive finger. The roof is green. We planted a garden. I didn't know that, Andrea said, and sounded like she actually didn't. Celeste's office was at the corner. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A desk that was organized in the particular way that means someone works at it very hard and has developed a system for the chaos. A sideboard with architectural models of what appeared to be hospital systems. A wall of framed documents. Patents, Nolan guessed, though he didn't read them. Celeste was behind the desk when they came in. She was in the chair today. She'd mentioned some days were cane days, and today apparently wasn't. And she was in the middle of something on her laptop, which she closed as they entered with the direct, deliberate attention of someone who has learned that halfway present is worse than absent. You came, she said. You went to some trouble to invite us, Nolan said. I have an efficient assistant. She found my number. She finds everything. Celeste looked at Sophie. Hi, Sophie. Hi, Celeste. Sophie crossed the room with confidence, set her sketchbook on the edge of the desk, and opened it to the last page. I made you something. Celeste looked at the drawing. Cinders, the fire horse in orange and red beside a blue horse of equal size and apparent magnificence, both mid-gallop, the ground beneath them rendered in joyful, abstract stripes. Between them, the artist had written in careful block letters, Cinders and Storm. Who's Storm? Celeste asked. Cinder's friend, Sophie explained. She has ice hooves, cold and hot. They help each other. Celeste studied the drawing for a long moment. Can I keep this one too? That's why I made it, Sophie said, in the tone of someone explaining an obvious thing patiently. Celeste pulled the drawing from the book carefully and set it to her right, alongside a thick stack of papers and a coffee mug with a chip in the handle that was slightly incongruous in the context of everything else in the room. "Sit down," she said. "Both of you, do you want anything? Coffee? Juice?" "Coffee," Nolan said. "Please." "Apple juice," Sophie said, "and maybe paper if you have some. I left my crayons in my bag and I don't want to interrupt." Andrea appeared with both in under 3 minutes, which meant she'd anticipated. Sophie installed herself in a chair by the window with a stack of printer paper and her crayons and became immediately peripheral in the way children do when they're engaged, present but interior, running on their own circuitry. Nolan sat across from Celeste's desk. She'd come around to the front of it, the way people do when they want a conversation instead of a meeting, and sat at an angle that made the space between them ordinary rather than formal. "I owe you an explanation," she said. "You don't owe me anything. I didn't tell you who I was. That was deliberate, and I want to explain why. Not to excuse it, but because—" She stopped and started again, which he was beginning to recognize as a thing she did when she was being careful about precision. "Because you deserve to know." "All right," he said. She looked out the window for a moment. The city spread below them in the particular way cities look from above. Orderly from a distance. You could almost believe it. The grid and the river and the geometry of rooftops. Everything that's chaotic and grinding and difficult converted from this height into something that looked like it had been planned by someone sensible. "I was diagnosed with MS at 24, she said. "I was in my second year of an MBA program. I'd already started the company. It was just me and 2 engineers in a rented office on the 4th floor of a building that no longer exists. The diagnosis was—" She turned the coffee mug slightly on the arm of her chair. "It was a lot to take in at 24. "I imagine it was. I kept working. That was the only way I knew how to process anything. The company grew. My mobility varied. Some years were fine, some years were harder. I learned to manage the perception of it, which I'm not particularly proud of, but which was pragmatic at the time." She paused. "When you're a woman in a leadership position in a technology company, you spend an enormous amount of energy managing the perception of weakness. Adding a visible disability to that calculus was—" She made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "I got good at staging my life. Good days for public appearances, bad days for internal work. A public image that didn't include the chair unless there was absolutely no option." "And Richard," Nolan said. She looked at him. "Richard?" "Yes." She shifted slightly. "We'd been dating for about 2 months. I liked him. I thought he was someone who looked at people clearly. A flat note in that. I kept making excuses for the chair, work injury, physical therapy. I kept waiting for the right time, and the right time kept not being right." "He found out at the worst possible time," Nolan said. "At the second worst possible time," she said. "The worst would have been if we'd been serious longer. 2 months is better to know than 2 years. He thought about that. "Yeah. It's still—" She stopped. "It still hurt," he said. "It still hurt," she agreed. "Not just the way he handled it. The performance of being fine that I'd been doing for years, it was right there, and someone just ripped the curtain." She was quiet for a moment. "And you sat down." He looked at his coffee. Sophie couldn't see the table. "Stop giving her the credit," Celeste said, not unkindly. He smiled at that. "Mostly her. Partly you." "Fine. Partly me." She turned the mug again. It was a habit, he noticed. She turned things when she was organizing her thoughts. The mug, papers sometimes, her phone when it was face down. Small rotations, like resetting a compass. "I had Andrea find you," she said, "because I wanted to tell you that. And because—" Another stop. The precision thing again. "Because it has been a very long time since I sat in a room with someone who didn't know what I was and treated me exactly the same way they would have if they had known. That sounds like it should be common. It isn't." Nolan thought about all the ways that could be true, and was. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yeah." "The black SUV, the team of assistants. That night I should have thought more about that." "Most people don't," she said. "They see the chair and they don't look past it, or they look too hard and see the chair and nothing else. You saw a woman alone in a diner and sat down. I saw someone who was having a bad night, he said. I've had bad nights. What was yours? He looked at her steadily. She was asking in the way she asked things, direct, without softening it into something easier. He appreciated that about her already, the directness. He'd met enough people who talked around things to know what it felt like when someone didn't. A lot of them, he said. The first year after Claire died was the worst. Sophie was 3. I had about 4 people in my life who would answer the phone at 2 a.m., and I called all of them too often. I moved 4 times in 18 months. I couldn't hold on to geography. I kept thinking if I found the right place, I'd figure out what came next, which doesn't work, but you do it anyway. What helped? She asked. Time. He turned his own mug. And Sophie needing breakfast every morning. That sounds small, but it's not small, Celeste said. No, it's not. He looked at his daughter, who was adding detail to a drawing with the concentrated focus of a surgeon. She kept me moving. Forward. Not necessarily in the right direction, but forward. She's remarkable, Celeste said. She's her mother's kid, Nolan said. I just try not to ruin it. Celeste was quiet for a second, looking at Sophie. Then she looked back at Nolan. You're not ruining it, she said. That much is obvious from about 4 minutes with her. He didn't know what to do with that, so he drank his coffee. They talked for another hour, which he hadn't expected and which Celeste apparently had, because Andrea held all her calls without being asked. They talked about the company. Celeste explained what it actually did. The software infrastructure, the logistics platforms, the data systems that tracked everything from patient medication schedules to hospital equipment maintenance. It was interesting in the way technical things are interesting when someone who cares about it explains it to you properly, not performing the caring but actually doing it. She'd built the original algorithm herself, at 23, in that 4th floor office. She still understood it better than most of her engineers. She said this without pride, just as a fact about how the thing worked. Nolan told her about the furniture again, more than last time, because she asked follow-up questions that meant she'd actually been thinking about it. She asked whether he'd ever considered doing it professionally, and he told her he'd priced it out twice, and the math didn't work for someone with a kid and a rent payment and a car that needed timing belt work every 18 months. She asked what the actual obstacle was, not rhetorically, but problem-solving, in the way someone thinks who spent 20 years building solutions to logistical problems. He said the startup cost, the shop space, the time the marketing would take before it paid. She nodded and didn't offer to fix it, which he respected. He would have rejected it, and they both knew that, though neither said so. At some point, Sophie came to Celeste's side of the desk with a drawing and asked if she could use the tape dispenser on the credenza. Celeste said yes. Sophie pulled a piece of tape, considered the wall beside the window, and looked at Celeste. Can I? She asked. Celeste looked at the wall. There was a framed architectural rendering in that space. A hospital system, precise and technical in charcoal and blue. She looked at it for a second and then looked at Sophie. Yeah, she said. You can. Sophie taped her newest drawing to the wall beside the window. It was a picture of a tall glass building with a tiny figure in a wheelchair looking out from a high window, and below on the street 2 small figures, one taller, one shorter, looking up, all of them waving. The sun was orange and very large. Nolan looked at it. Celeste looked at it. She looks happy, Celeste said quietly. The figure in the window. Sophie makes everyone happy in her drawings, Nolan said. It's editorial policy. Smart editor. Sophie had already moved on to the next drawing. She didn't look up. They left around noon, Andrea walking them to the elevator with the smooth efficiency that was clearly just her baseline. In the lobby, Sophie stopped to look at the ceiling lattice again. The way the light was different now at noon than it had been at 9:45. The angles shifted, everything recomposed. The light moves, she observed. It does, Nolan said. I want to draw that. You can try. She looked at it for a long time with her head tilted, committing it to whatever archive she kept behind those eyes, and then nodded to herself and walked toward the door. In the car, she buckled her seatbelt with the effort of the chest clip and said without preamble, Celeste is lonely. Nolan checked his mirrors before pulling out. What makes you say that? Her office is really big, and there's only one cup on her desk. One coffee cup. Not for visitors, just hers. She thought about it. And her tape dispenser was dusty, so no one uses it but her. People use things that other people are around. He drove a block before he said anything. When did you start noticing tape dispensers? I notice everything, Sophie said with the complete, uncomplicated certainty of someone who is right. He drove. Outside, the city moved around them in the ordinary, irreversible way of Saturday mornings. People with groceries, people with strollers, a man walking a dog that appeared to have strong opinions about a particular lamppost, the ordinary irreversibility of other people's lives. Nolan thought about the dusty tape dispenser. He thought about the one chipped coffee mug in a 32nd floor corner office that had cost more to fit out than most people's houses. He thought about the way Celeste had looked at Sophie's drawing on the wall. Not quickly, not with polite attention, but with the long, still look of someone who had not expected to be surprised and was. He thought about what she'd said. It has been a very long time since I sat in a room with someone who didn't know what I was and treated me exactly the same way they would have if they had known. He didn't know what to do with any of it, practically speaking. He knew a few things. He knew that Sophie was right, the way Sophie was often right about people in ways that didn't come from analysis or experience, but from some direct channel to whatever was real in a room. He knew that an hour and a half in Celeste Langford's corner office had felt more like genuine human contact than most things he could recall from the past several months. He knew that she had taped Sophie's drawing of the tall building to her wall beside the window, without hesitating, and that she'd held the drawing of Cinders and Storm with both hands. He didn't know what any of that meant going forward, if anything. He pulled into the grocery store lot because they were out of eggs and Sophie needed string cheese, and the week didn't pause because things had shifted somewhere inside of it. "Can I get the kind with the orange wax outside?" Sophie asked. "The cheese with wax is not string cheese. That's a different product. It's also good." "We're getting the string kind, Soph." "One of each?" He turned off the car. Through the windshield, a grocery cart rolled slowly across the empty section of the lot, gaining speed, corrected at the last moment by a teenager moving with the instinctive efficiency of someone who has done this 100 times. Minor catastrophe averted. Everything ordinary and continuing. "One of each," Nolan said. Sophie unbuckled with a sound of triumph and was already out the door. He sat in the car for 10 more seconds, alone, in the specific quiet of an ordinary Saturday that had been something else this morning, and then he got out and followed his daughter into the fluorescent light of the grocery store and didn't look back. That night, after dinner and the bath and the story and the long geography of bedtime, he went to the garage. He turned on the lamp above the work table. The side table was there with its clamped new leg, set and dry, and he took the clamps off one by one and tested the joint, which held. He set the table on its feet and stepped back and looked at it. 4 legs. One of them different. The grain didn't match. You could see the repair clearly if you looked for it. He looked at it for a long time. Then he got the finishing oil down from the shelf and started working. 3 weeks after the visit to Langford Health Technologies, Nolan replaced the timing belt on his Civic in the driveway on a Sunday morning while Sophie sat on the front step drawing and periodically offering what she described as technical advice. "I think you need a bigger wrench," she said. "I have the right wrench." "It doesn't look like it's working." "It's working. You made the door sound." "I make the door sound when I stand up, Soph. I make it when I kneel down too now. That's just my back." "You should see a doctor." "Thank you." Ms. Alvarez says ignoring things doesn't make them not real. He got the belt seated, checked the tension, and straightened up with the sound Sophie had accurately diagnosed. The morning was cold and dry, the kind of November Sunday that couldn't decide between fall and winter, and had landed on something gray and irresolute. His hands were engine black to the wrists, and he'd already used the last of the shop rags on the oil that had dripped when he first cracked the casing. "Ms. Alvarez is right about most things," he said. "She's right about all things," Sophie said. "Except Mr. President. She thinks he's friendly, but he bit Marcus twice." Maybe Marcus had it coming. Sophie considered this. "Probably," she said, and went back to drawing. He was closing the hood when his phone buzzed in his back pocket. He wiped his hands on his jeans. The shop rags were gone, so the jeans were already lost, and looked at the screen. Celeste. They'd been texting for about 2 weeks. It had started practically. She'd sent him an article about a furniture restoration studio that had opened downtown, and he'd written back saying the rent in that building was probably 4 times what made sense. And she'd said she was sending it for the information, not as a financial recommendation. And somehow from that they'd been texting most days. Not lengthy. They were both people who had things to do, but consistently, in the way that means someone is thinking about you when they're not talking to you. He'd called her twice. She'd called him once, late, after a board meeting that had apparently been a significant ordeal, and they'd talked for almost an hour about nothing urgent, which was the best kind of conversation. He was not calling it anything. He was just noting the facts as they existed. He answered. "I need to ask you something," Celeste said, "and I want you to hear the whole thing before you answer." He leaned against the car. "Okay. Are you somewhere you can talk?" "Driveway. Sophie's on the step." He glanced over. Sophie was drawing, apparently deeply invested, crayon moving fast. "She's distracted." "How distracted?" "She just started something new, probably 20 minutes." "All right." He heard Celeste shift, the small sounds of her moving, something being set down. She was in her office, he guessed. She worked Sundays the way other people work Tuesdays, as if the day had no particular significance. "I've been building something for about 8 months," she said. "A program. Internal to the company, funded through the foundation arm. It's called the Cornerstone Initiative. It's a nationwide outreach program for single parents in financial crisis. Food access, emergency transportation, temporary childcare, housing bridge funding. The kind of support that keeps people from losing everything during a 2-week gap between paychecks." He was quiet, listening. "We've been running a pilot in 4 cities for the last 6 months," she continued. "It works. The data is clear, the community uptake has been strong, and the board approved full national expansion last Tuesday, which means I need someone to run it." The timing belt on the Civic ticked as the engine cooled. Somewhere down the street, a dog was making a case for being let inside. "Celeste," he said, you said you'd hear the whole thing." "I'm hearing it." "The role is Director of Community Operations. It's a real position with a real salary and benefits, and it reports directly to me. The person who runs it will oversee partnerships with food banks, transportation networks, childcare providers, emergency housing organizations. They'll manage regional coordinators. They'll be the face of the program in the communities it serves." She paused. "I want it to be you." He looked at Sophie on the step. She'd moved from whatever she was drawing to a new page, still absorbed, unaware. "I have a high school diploma and a delivery route," Nolan said. "I know what you have." "Celeste, I've never run anything." "You've run your life for 6 years under conditions that would have broken most people," she said, and the flatness of it, not inspirational, not performed, just stated, stopped him from the immediate next objection. "You know what it means to not have enough. You know what it means to need help and not be able to ask for it because the systems aren't built for people in motion. You know what a 2-week gap between paychecks actually costs a family, not as a data point, but as a lived reality. That's not something I can hire from a business school." "You can hire someone with both," he said. "Someone who has the experience and the degree." "I've interviewed 11 people," she said. 8 from consulting firms, 2 from nonprofits, 1 from the federal government. They all had excellent credentials. They were all very good at explaining the problem from the outside. A pause. "I don't need someone who can explain the problem. I need someone who knows what it's actually like to be inside it." He heard her. He understood the argument. It was not an unreasonable argument. It was also terrifying, which he was not going to say out loud. "What does the salary look like?" he asked, because it was the practical question, and the practical questions were easier. She told him. He stood in his driveway with engine grease on his hands and the number in his ears, and looked at his rented house with the front step that needed repainting, and the garage where he kept his furniture and a second-hand router and a lamp he'd rescued from a yard sale in 2021. "That's..." He stopped. "It's fair for the role," she said. "It's not a favor. It's what the position warrants. It's 3 times what I make. The position has significant responsibility." 3 times is appropriate. He rubbed the back of his neck with the back of his wrist, keeping the grease away from his skin by force of habit. What does the board think about you hiring a delivery driver? The board approved the position. I decide who fills it. That's not an answer to my question. A brief pause. The board will have opinions, she said. They always have opinions. I've been managing their opinions for 9 years, and the company is still standing. What they think of my hiring decisions is secondary to whether the program succeeds. And if it doesn't succeed, it's on both of us. Mostly on you, she said. You'd be running it. He almost laughed. That's honest. I'm always honest. Sometimes late, but always honest. He looked at his hands, the grease under the nails, the scar along the left thumb, the callus from the sanding block, the hands of someone who worked with them, who had learned everything he knew by doing it wrong first and then figuring it out. I need to think about it, he said. I know. I'm not saying no. I'm saying I need to actually think. Nolan, her voice was steady. Take the time. I'm not going anywhere. Neither is the position. But I want you to understand that I'm not making this offer because of the diner. I'm not doing this because you were kind to me on a bad night and I'm settling a debt. I don't work that way. He heard her turn something. The mug, he guessed, or her phone. I'm making this offer because I watched you for 3 hours in this building with your daughter, and with Andrea, and with the security guard in the lobby who told you his name was Pete, and you remembered it when you left and said goodbye to him by name. I watched you notice things. I watched you make people feel like people. That's rare, and it's specifically what this program needs. He thought about Pete, the guard with the square jaw and the patient expression who'd been checking IDs since 7 that morning. He hadn't realized he'd said the name on the way out. He always said names on the way out. Claire had told him once that it was one of her favorite things about him, the names. He'd kept doing it after she died without thinking about why. I'll call you Thursday, he said. Thursday's fine. Celeste? Yeah. Why 8 months? He said. Well, building the program. Why start it 8 months ago? A pause. What do you mean? You've been running this company for 9 years. The foundation arm has been active for 5. I looked it up. Why this program now? The pause was longer this time. He heard her breathe once. Because 8 months ago I had a bad day, she said. I'd been using the chair for 3 days straight, which happens and is not the worst thing in the world, but I had a board meeting on the 3rd day, and one of the board members, someone I'd known for 4 years, someone I'd trusted, asked my assistant afterward, not me, my assistant, whether I was still capable of running the company at full capacity. She said it evenly. I went home and I sat with that for a while, and I thought about all the people who get that question asked about them every day, not because of a disability, but because of money or circumstance, or the specific bad luck of needing help when the systems designed to help them are built to be hard to navigate. She stopped. So I built a better system. He stood in his driveway and felt the weight of that, the specific unglamorous weight of someone deciding to turn a wound into something useful. Thursday, he said. Thursday, she agreed. He hung up and stood for another moment before Sophie's voice came across the yard. Was that Celeste? She called. Yeah. What did she want? She offered me a job. Sophie looked up from her sketchbook. Are you going to take it? I don't know yet. She looked at him the way she looked at things she was drawing, not casually, but with the focused inventory of someone committing it to memory. Daddy, she said. Yeah. Your back makes the door sound. Your car needed fixing. Your boots have a hole in the left one. She held up her drawing hand. I think you should take it. He looked at his left boot. The hole was on the inner sole, which he'd patched twice with the silicone adhesive he kept in the garage for wood repairs. It had held reasonably well. I'll think about it, he said. You're already thinking about it, Sophie said. Thinking about it is different from deciding. She went back to her drawing. That's what Ms. Alvarez says. He went inside to wash the grease off his hands and stood at the kitchen sink for a long time with the water running. He called Renata that evening. She offered you what? Renata said. He told her again, with the number. The silence on Renata's end was not her usual silence, which was the silence of someone composing an opinion. This was a different quality, the stunned silence of someone doing involuntary arithmetic. "Nolan," she said. "I know." I know, Renata. You could fix the boot." "I know I could fix the boot." "You could fix about 40 boots." "I understand the implication." She made the sound she made when she was pulling back from the practical to think about the other thing. "What are you scared of?" she asked. "Specifically," he turned the kitchen faucet off and dried his hands on the dish towel, "that I'll get in there and not know what I'm doing and fail visibly in front of someone who trusted me." "That's a real risk," Renata said. "Thanks. I'm not dismissing it. It's real." "What else?" "That it changes things between me and—" He stopped. "Between you and Celeste. Working for her changes the dynamic." "Working with her," Renata said. "Renata, she said you'd report to her, not work for her." "That's a fine line." "Most important lines are." He sat down at the kitchen table. Through the window, the yard was dark, the garage light off, the rented house quiet in the way it got once Sophie was asleep. The particular silence that was not peaceful so much as empty, the silence of a space built for more than one adult. "She said she's not doing it because of the diner," he said. "Not as a debt." "Do you believe her?" He thought about it honestly. He'd been thinking about it since he hung up the phone that morning, in the particular way you think about things you need to get right. Not compulsively, but with the steady low attention of something that matters. He thought about the interview, such as it had been. The way she'd watched him with Andrea and Pete. The way she'd made her case without sentiment, as a business argument. The way she'd said, "I don't work that way," with the matter-of-fact certainty of someone who genuinely didn't. "Yeah," he said, "I believe her." "Then the question is whether you believe yourself," Renata said. "Whether you think you can do it." "I don't know if I can." "Nobody does, until." "That's not reassuring." "It's not meant to be reassuring. It's meant to be accurate." She paused. "Nolan, you have been figuring things out your entire adult life with almost no margin for error. You raised that kid through things that would have flattened someone without your stubbornness. You built an entire side business in a garage with a secondhand router and whatever you found in junk shops. You figured all of it out." Her voice was not soft exactly. Renata didn't do soft. But it had the directness of someone saying something they've been waiting to say for a while. "You are not unqualified. You are a person who has not had the opportunity. Those are different things." He sat with that. "If it doesn't work out," she said, "you come home and get another delivery route, and you're no worse than before." "I'd be worse than before," he said. "I'd have tried and failed." "That's better than not trying," Renata said. "You know that." He knew that. He put Sophie to bed that night and sat on the edge of her mattress for longer than usual, her small, warm weight pressed against his side, the sketchbook on the nightstand with the new drawing on top. A tall building again, but different this time. He could see it in the lamplight from the hall. The tall building, and inside it on a high floor, 2 figures at a desk, and outside on the street below, other figures, many of them, small but present, a whole street full. Some of them had bags. Some had children of their own, tiny crayon stick figures with outsized heads. All of them were looking up. He picked it up carefully. "I was going to show you in the morning," Sophie said, eyes still closed. "Sorry." "That's Cornerstone," she said. "The program." He hadn't told her the name. "How do you know the name?" "You said it on the phone this morning." He looked at the drawing. The building with the 2 figures at the top and the street full of people below. "You think I should take it," he said. "I told you what I think," Sophie murmured, half asleep. "Your boots have a hole." He set the drawing back on the nightstand. He pulled the blanket up, tucked it the way she liked, not too tight on the feet, loose on top, and turned off the lamp. He stood in the dark doorway for a moment. "Daddy?" Sophie's voice was mostly sleep. "Yeah. The people in the street. I made them looking up because someone finally built something for them." A pause. "You could be the one who runs it." He didn't say anything. He stood in the doorway and looked at his daughter and thought about all the years of Tuesday mornings with exactly enough money and not more, about parking lots at hospitals eating sandwiches alone, about standing in Sophie's doorway at night because it was the one moment of the day where he was certain he was in the right place doing the right thing. He thought about the people who hadn't had even what he had, not the delivery route, not the garage and the router, not Renata who answered at 2 a.m. He went to the garage, not to work. He just stood in it for a while, the light on, the side table on its 4 legs in the corner, the fourth one different, the repair visible if you looked. He stood looking at it for several minutes. Then he went to his work table and found a piece of paper and a pen and wrote down everything he didn't know how to do. It was a long list. He looked at it for a while. Then he wrote down everything he understood from having lived it: food banks, transportation dead zones, childcare gaps on irregular work schedules, emergency housing that required 3 forms of ID you didn't have, the specific bureaucratic maze of systems designed by people who had never needed them. That list was longer. He folded both pieces of paper and put them in his jacket pocket. He called Celeste on Wednesday. Not Thursday. Wednesday, because he'd made up his mind Tuesday night, and waiting until Thursday felt like performing deliberation rather than actually doing it. She answered on the second ring. "It's Wednesday," she said. "I know what day it is." "You said Thursday." "I changed my mind about the timeline." He was in his car, parked outside the medical supply warehouse while his next delivery was being staged. "I want to take the position." A pause. Not surprise exactly. More like the sound of someone who has been waiting for something and is absorbing the fact of it arriving. "Okay," she said. "I need to be honest with you about what I don't know," he said. "Not as a disclaimer, as an actual thing. I wrote it down." "All right." "I don't know nonprofit governance. I don't know how to manage a budget at this scale. I don't know how to run regional coordinators or navigate the organizational politics of a company this size. I don't know how to talk to a board." He paused. "I'll learn all of it. I'll work harder than anyone you've hired to do that. But you need to know what you're getting going in." "I know what I'm getting," she said. "You need to know the specifics." "Nolan," her voice was steady. "I've been running a company since I was 23. I know how to teach someone governance and budget structure and board management. What I cannot teach is what you already have." She paused. "I need both. I'm hiring what I can't teach, and I'll provide what I can." He looked at the warehouse door, where a forklift was moving between rows of shelving. His last delivery of the morning. His last delivery of... He hadn't calculated. It hadn't been the thing he focused on. "When do I start?" he said. 2 weeks, she said. "That gives you time to close out your contracts responsibly. I'd prefer you do that properly." "I would have anyway." "I know you would have," she said. "That's why I said 2 weeks instead of 1. He noticed she did that, anticipated the argument and structured around it so it didn't need to be had. He filed it as a thing to remember, the way she operated. "There's one more thing," he said. "Okay. Sophie knows the name of the program already. I didn't tell her." "I know. I told her," Celeste said. "When you were talking to Andrea last Saturday, she asked me what my company was working on that I cared about most, and I told her about Cornerstone." He thought about Sophie on the step with the sketchbook, the tall building with the street full of people below. "She drew it," he said. A pause. "What?" "Saturday night. She drew it. The building and the people outside looking up. She didn't show me until I went into her room." Silence for a moment on the line. "I'd like to see it," Celeste said, quietly. "I'll bring it in." Another silence, different from the first. He'd noticed that her silences had different textures. This one was the texture of someone holding something carefully. "Nolan," she said. "Yeah. Thank you for saying yes." "Don't thank me yet," he said. "I haven't done anything yet." "You showed up," she said. "So far, that's been the whole thing." He drove his last delivery after that. A medical supply order to a physical therapy clinic in the warehouse district. 3 boxes. A therapist named Diane, who signed the delivery slip and asked if he wanted coffee, which he declined because he was going to have enough to do this afternoon. He drove back to the warehouse, returned the van, filled out his final delivery log, and handed in his keycard at the front desk to Marcus, who had been at the front desk for 11 years and kept a photo of his granddaughter on the monitor. That's it for me, Nolan said. 2 weeks out. Marcus looked at the key card. You sure? Got something else lined up. Marcus nodded slowly. Good for you, man. You were always better than route work. Route work paid my rent for 4 years. Still, Marcus said. Good for you. They shook hands. Nolan went to his car. The 2 weeks were strange in the specific way that transitions are strange, neither here nor there, the present continuous of a life that is already partly elsewhere. He finished his contracts, all of them, on time, leaving the routes cleaner than he'd found them because that was simply how he did things, and the fact that he was leaving didn't change that. He told his landlord he might be moving. The Cornerstone salary made that viable in a way it hadn't been. And his landlord, a quiet man named Gregory who fixed things promptly and never raised the rent unexpectedly, said he'd give him 60 days to decide. He told Sophie. Sophie's response to the news that they might move was to ask whether the new place would have a garage. I can look for one with a garage, Nolan said. You need the garage, she said, for the furniture. I'd still do the furniture on evenings and weekends. Obviously, Sophie said, in the tone of someone correcting a misunderstanding. The furniture is yours. The job is also yours. You can have 2 things. He looked at his 6-year-old. When did you get this wise? Ms. Alvarez says wisdom is just paying attention for long enough. She held up her drawing hand, index finger raised, which was apparently the gesture she'd decided accompanied important points. I pay attention. He took her to school that Friday, the Friday before his first Monday at Langford, and sat in the pickup lane after she'd gone through the doors, watching the other parents cycle through the drop-off. He watched them the way he'd watched things in parking garages and waiting rooms for years. The quiet inventory of people in motion. The ones who lingered at the door. The ones who drove away fast. The ones who looked back twice. Single parents were recognizable in certain ways, not always the obvious ways, but the particular economy of movement, the way their attention divided. He drove to a coffee shop he'd never been to before and ordered a coffee and sat at a table by the window and took the 2 folded pieces of paper out of his jacket pocket. He unfolded both. The list of what he didn't know. The list of what he understood from living it. He read them both. He folded them back up and put them in his pocket and drank his coffee. When he got home that afternoon, there was a package on the porch. No return address, just his name and address in Andrea's handwriting, which he recognized from the letter that had accompanied the formal offer. He brought it inside and opened it. It was a book, a practical guide to nonprofit operations and community program management, dense, well-regarded, the kind of textbook people brought to graduate programs and annotated heavily. On the inside cover, in Celeste's handwriting, a single line. You said you'd learn it. Start here. He set it on the kitchen table. He made dinner. He picked up Sophie. He read the book that night for 2 hours after she went to sleep, sitting at the kitchen table with a yellow highlighter he found in Sophie's school supplies drawer, the same kind she used for her drawings, bright and slightly too thick for margin notes, but functional. He got through 40 pages before his eyes gave out. He bookmarked it with one of the pieces of folded paper, the list of what he didn't know, and went to bed. He stared at the ceiling for a while, not anxious exactly, more the feeling of standing at the edge of something large, something with a scope he couldn't fully see yet, waiting for his eyes to adjust to the dark. He thought about Celeste saying so far, that's been the whole thing, showing up. He thought about Pete the security guard and his name. He thought about Sophie's drawing of the building with the street full of people below, all of them looking up. He thought about what Renata had said. You are not unqualified. You are a person who has not had the opportunity. He thought about the side table in the garage with the 4 legs, one different, the repair visible if you looked. He turned over and closed his eyes. Monday was 4 days away. He'd be ready, or he wouldn't, and he'd figure it out either way, which was the only method he'd ever actually had. Monday arrived the way important days usually do, indistinguishable from any other morning until you're already inside it. Nolan's alarm went off at 5:45, same as always. He made coffee, made Sophie's lunch, peanut butter, the kind without chunks, apple slices, the small bag of pretzels she'd negotiated into the rotation 3 weeks ago on the grounds that pretzels were technically a grain. He woke Sophie at 6:30, oversaw the slow archaeology of getting dressed, drove her to school, watched her go through the doors with the listing backpack, and then sat in the parking lane for 30 seconds before turning toward downtown instead of the warehouse district. He wore the collared shirt, the one he'd pressed before the visit to Celeste's office. He'd pressed it again Sunday night, standing at the ironing board in the kitchen with the kind of focused attention he usually gave to wood joints, running the iron over each seam twice. He'd bought new boots on Saturday, not expensive. He'd found them at a workwear shop on Clement Street, solid leather, good sole, the kind that would last. Sophie had inspected them and said they looked professional. He'd said thank you. She'd said it wasn't a compliment, it was an observation. He'd said that was fine. Pete was at the security desk in the Langford lobby. He looked up when Nolan came through the glass doors. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "Andrea told me you were starting today." "Nolan," he said, "please." Pete smiled, the measured smile of a man who'd been working security for 20 years and had opinions about things but kept most of them behind the desk. "Nolan," he said, 32nd floor's expecting you." The elevator opened onto the wide hallway with the three-sided city view. Andrea was waiting, not with the visitor energy she'd had before, but with the different quality of someone orienting a colleague. She shook his hand, walked him to a different office this time. Not the corner, which was Celeste's, but one 3 doors down with a window facing east and a desk that had been recently cleared of whatever its previous occupant had left. There was a new laptop on the desk, still in the box, and a stack of folders and a coffee mug that was not chipped. "Celeste wanted me to get you set up before she pulls you in," Andrea said. "IT will be up at 9 to configure the laptop. The folders are the Cornerstone pilot data. 6 months from the 4 cities, plus the board presentation from last Tuesday if you want background on how the expansion was framed." "Good," Nolan said. "Thank you." Andrea paused at the door. "For what it's worth," she said, "I've worked for Celeste for 6 years. She doesn't do things for the wrong reasons. When she makes a decision, she's already run it 14 ways." She looked at him directly. "So whatever doubt you're carrying about whether you belong here, you can keep carrying it if it's useful, but know that she did the math." He looked at her. "Did she tell you to say that?" "No," Andrea said. "She'd actually be annoyed that I said it." A brief, real smile. 9 o'clock for IT coffees down the hall, second door on the left. The carafe closest to the window is the good one. She left. He sat down at the desk. He set his jacket on the back of the chair and opened the top folder. The pilot data was dense and real in the way real data is, Cho. Not clean, not triumphant, full of the friction that actual programs accumulate when they run into actual people's lives. 4 cities: Columbus, Memphis, Fresno, Providence. 6 months. He read for 2 hours through the IT setup, through the first 2 orientation meetings Andrea had scheduled, taking notes in the margin of a legal pad he'd brought from home because he didn't know where the legal pads were yet. He noticed things as he read. The transportation data in Memphis showed a gap between where the program's partner transport providers operated and where the highest need families actually lived. A coverage hole of about 4 square miles that the pilot report flagged. And then, in the next section, dropped. He circled it. He noticed the childcare partnership in Fresno had a waitlist problem. The program connected families to existing childcare providers, but hadn't anticipated that those providers were already at capacity, creating a referral pipeline that ended in a wall. He circled that too. He was reading the Providence numbers when Celeste appeared in the doorway. She was in the chair today, a different one than the office chair. This was the manual chair, lighter, which she tended to use when she was moving around the building rather than sitting at a desk. She had a coffee mug in one hand, the same chipped one from her office, and she looked at the legal pad on his desk with the 2 circled items and the notes running down the margin. "You've been here 3 hours," she said. "The Memphis coverage gap is a structural problem, not a data problem," he said. "The pilot report flags it and moves on. That's the wrong move." She looked at him steadily. "Tell me." "The families who need transport the most are in the southeast quadrant. The partner providers don't cover southeast. So the families who can least afford alternatives are the ones the program can't reach." He turned the legal pad toward her. "The report treats it like a footnote. It's not a footnote, it's a design flaw in the Memphis model. Celeste came into the office and looked at the pad. She was quiet for a moment, reading his notes. We knew about the gap, she said. Then why isn't there a solution in the expansion framework? Because finding a transport partner in the southeast quadrant who meets our vetting requirements hasn't happened yet. Has anyone gone there, Bus? He said. To the southeast quadrant. To talk to the people who actually live in it? She looked at him. The pilot data is surveys and intake forms, he said. It's good data, but surveys are what people say when someone hands them a form. They're not what people say when someone's sitting across from them. He stopped. I'm not criticizing the pilot team. I know you're not, she said. I know what a form feels like when you're the one filling it out. You say what you think you're supposed to say. Or you say what you have energy to say, which is not always the same as what's true. He paused. Someone should go there. Someone should go there, Celeste agreed. That's why I hired someone who'd know that. He sat back. The city outside the east window was fully mid-morning now, the kind of flat November light that didn't flatter buildings but made them honest. The stainless and glass and concrete of it, the water tower on the roof of the building across the street with a rust stripe running down one side that nobody had fixed yet. The Fresno childcare pipeline, he said. That one's harder. Yes. You can't refer people to capacity that doesn't exist. No. So either the program needs to fund additional capacity, which is expensive, or it needs a different model. Not referrals, something more direct. He thought about Sophie at 6:30 in the morning, needing to be somewhere by 7:40, him needing to be somewhere by 8. The math of that. The way it worked only because there were no variables, no sick days, no schedule changes, no gap. Corporate partnerships, he said. Companies with on-site childcare. Some of them have unused capacity during certain hours. If the program could negotiate access agreements, that's an operational lift, Celeste said. I know it's an operational lift, but referrals to a wait list aren't a solution. They're a delay with paperwork. She turned her coffee mug. He recognized it now as a thinking gesture, not an absent one. She was running it somewhere, checking it against something internal. Write it up, she said. The Memphis coverage gap and the Fresno childcare model. Not a formal report, just your thinking, your language. Bring it to the expansion planning meeting Thursday. Who's in the meeting? You, me, the 4 regional directors, and the Foundation's legal counsel. She paused. And 2 board members who requested to sit in. He was quiet. They have questions about the expansion budget, she said. It's normal. They have questions about who's running it, he said. Also normal. Celeste. Nolan. Her voice was calm and direct, the way it got when she was being precise. You will walk in there Thursday with a legal pad full of observations you made in 3 hours that my pilot team missed in 6 months. You let that speak. She met his eyes. The board responds to results. Give them a preview. The Thursday meeting was in the large conference room on 32. Oval table, 10 chairs, a screen at one end displaying the Cornerstone logo and the expansion map, 28 cities marked in orange across the country. Nolan arrived 8 minutes early, which was 4 minutes before anyone else. He set his legal pad down, got water from the credenza, and stood at the window looking at the map while the room filled behind him. The regional directors were not what he'd expected, which was his own failure of imagination. He'd carried some vague picture of corporate people in corporate clothes, and what came through the door instead were 4 individuals who had the specific worn-in look of people who had been doing community work for a long time, tired in the productive way, carrying the particular weight of work that matters and doesn't always show results fast enough to be satisfying. Darius Webb was the Midwest director, Memphis-based, a big man with a quiet voice and the patient expression of someone who had learned to wait out other people's assumptions. He shook Nolan's hand and said he'd read the background brief Andrea had sent. I heard you were in delivery, he said. 4 years, Nolan said. Medical supply, mostly. Darius nodded slowly. My sister drove school buses for 12 years, said she knew every neighborhood in her city better than the city planners did. That's accurate, Nolan said. Yeah, Darius said. I know it is. The 2 board members came in with the tight energy of people who have opinions they've been holding since before they sat down. Martin Cho was 60s, finance background, the precise and humorless manner of someone who trusted numbers and was not yet sure what category Nolan fell into. The other was Helen Park, a woman in her late 50s who had made her money in hospital administration and whose expression as she looked at Nolan was not hostile, but was the expression of someone completing a calculation. Celeste ran the meeting. She was at the head of the table, the expansion map on the screen behind her, and she ran it the way Nolan was beginning to understand she ran everything, with the forward direction of someone who has already thought 3 moves ahead and is now simply making the path visible to the people in the room. She covered the pilot results, the budget framework for expansion, the timeline. 28 cities over 18 months, 40,000 families in the first year, projecting upward from there. The numbers were solid. Martin Cho asked 3 questions about the budget allocation and got 3 precise answers. Helen Park asked about legal liability in the housing bridge funding model and got referred to legal counsel, who answered without hedging. Then Celeste said, "Nolan, tell them what you found in the pilot data." He hadn't been expecting the handoff at that moment. He'd thought it would come after more context, more setup. It didn't. She just turned and said it, and the table turned with her. He picked up the legal pad. He talked about the Memphis coverage gap, what it was, why it mattered, what it meant for the families in the southeast quadrant who were technically in the program's service area and practically unreachable. He talked about it plainly, without business language, the way you'd explain a broken system to someone who'd never seen it from the inside. He described what it felt like to be on a waiting list for a resource that was supposed to help you, the way it extended the crisis rather than resolving it, the way it cost something beyond money. Martin Cho's pen stopped moving. He talked about Fresno, the referral to waitlist pipeline, the childcare capacity problem, the corporate partnership model he'd sketched out. He said it was rough and needed real development, but the principle was sound. Unused capacity existed. The program needed a way to access it, and negotiation was cheaper than construction. Helen Park leaned forward slightly. He talked for 11 minutes. Then he stopped. The room was quiet for a moment. "How long have you been in this role?" Martin Cho asked. 3 days, Nolan said. Cho looked at Celeste. She met it without expression. "The corporate childcare model," Helen said. "You'd need legal agreements with participating companies, liability frameworks, quality vetting." "Yes," Nolan said. "That's a significant operational build." "It is. The alternative is telling families the program can help with childcare and then putting them on a list that doesn't move fast enough to matter." He paused. "In my experience, a difficult solution that works is better than an easy solution that doesn't." Helen looked at him for a long moment, the look of someone revising a calculation. "In your experience," she said, and it wasn't mocking, it was actually a question. "I raised a kid alone on a delivery driver's salary," he said. "Childcare was the hardest part, not the money exactly, the availability, the gap between what exists and when you need it." He set down the pad. "I'm not telling you I know how to build the legal framework. I'm telling you the problem is real, and the current model doesn't solve it. The build is what we do next." Martin Cho wrote something on his notepad. Nolan couldn't see what. After the meeting, Helen Park stopped him in the hallway. "I'll be honest with you," she said. "I had reservations." "I know," he said. "I still have some." "That's fair." She looked at him with the direct appraisal she'd had on him since she sat down. "But I've been in hospital administration for 30 years, and I have never once heard someone identify a coverage gap and a pipeline failure in the same breath in their first week without being coached to." She paused. "So, we'll see." "That's all I'm asking," he said. She walked away. Nolan went back to his office, sat down, and stared at the city out the east window for approximately 90 seconds. Then he opened the legal pad to a new page and started writing. The months that followed did not go smoothly. That is important to say clearly, because the story of a program expanding across 28 cities in 18 months sounds, in summary, like a success. And it was eventually, in the way that things that work are successes. But the interior of it was consistently, exhaustingly difficult in ways that no pilot data or board presentation conveyed. The first city to launch after the pilot 4 was Detroit in February. Nolan flew out with Darius for the launch week and spent 3 days in community centers and church halls and a school gymnasium on the east side. Sitting across from case managers and social workers and family advocates who had been doing this work for years with whatever funding they could patch together, and who were understandably skeptical of a corporate-backed program with a glossy rollout presentation. A woman named Cheryl, who ran a family resource center out of a converted auto shop on Mack Avenue, said it directly. "We've had programs come through here before. They come in, they count people, they take the photos for the annual report, and 6 months later, when the funding cycle changes, they're gone, and we're the ones explaining to families why the help stopped." "That's a fair concern," Nolan said. "It's not a concern," Cheryl said. "It's a history." He sat with that for a moment. Around them, the resource center was alive with the specific industry of a place that had been running on shortage for years. Folding tables, donated equipment, volunteers who knew exactly where everything was because they'd organized it themselves. "What would make it different?" he asked. "Not theoretically. What would you actually need to see?" Cheryl looked at him the way people look at you when they're deciding whether the question is genuine. "Multi-year commitment in writing," she said. "Community oversight. Not advisory boards that meet once a quarter and rubber stamp. Actual oversight with decision-making authority. And the program needs to hire locally, not fly people in from downtown who don't know the streets." He wrote it down. He called Celeste from the hotel that night. "The community oversight piece is going to require a governance restructure," she said when he'd laid it out. "I know. That means going back to the board." "I know that too." A pause. "Is it the right call?" "Yes," he said. "Without it, we're another program that collects data on people's hardship and disappears. Cheryl's been watching those for 20 years. She knows what they look like." "So do the families they were supposed to help," Celeste said. "Yeah." Another pause. The sound of her thinking, which he'd learned to recognize over months, the particular quality of silence that meant she was running it, checking it, landing somewhere. "Write it up," she said. "I'll schedule the board conversation." The board conversation was not easy. Martin Cho had objections about liability exposure in community oversight structures. Helen Park, to Nolan's genuine surprise, supported the proposal and carried 2 other board members with her. The restructure passed with conditions: legal frameworks for the oversight committees, term limits, a defined scope of authority. It was a compromise that satisfied nobody completely, which Nolan had come to understand was often what workable solutions looked like. He spent more time in the field than anyone expected a program director to spend. This was a source of some friction. Andrea managed his calendar with the patience of someone navigating a natural phenomenon, scheduling around the field visits he considered non-negotiable rather than trying to eliminate them. Celeste never told him to stay at his desk. She'd come to his office door occasionally and find it empty and text him, and he'd be in a family resource center in Cleveland, or a food bank in Phoenix, or a school district office in Baton Rouge, taking notes, asking questions, eating whatever someone offered him, because refusing food someone offered was not something he was capable of doing. He learned things in those visits that he could not have learned any other way. He learned that the food access component of the program was working better for families with cars than families without, which was backwards given that transportation poverty and food insecurity ran together. He learned that the emergency housing bridge funding had a paperwork threshold that was specifically difficult for parents working irregular hours. The documentation window closed at 5 p.m. on business days, which was exactly when a shift worker couldn't get to a computer. He changed the window. It took 3 weeks of administrative argument to change a browser setting, but he changed it. He learned that families were more likely to engage with the program when the outreach worker looked like someone from their community. He started partnering with local community colleges for outreach coordinator training, hiring from the neighborhoods the program served. This was Cheryl's idea, formally, though Nolan had been thinking it for months. Cheryl, it turned out, became one of the program's most important regional voices. Not in an official capacity, but in the organic way that someone who has been doing the work longest and knows where the bodies are buried becomes the person everyone defers to in a room. Nolan called her most weeks. She was direct to the point of occasionally being difficult. He valued that more than almost anything else about the working relationship. "You're doing better than the last 3 programs," she told him, 7 months in. "That's not a compliment, that's a low bar. But you're doing better." "What would doing well look like?" he asked. Families not needing the program anymore, she said, because they're stable. Not just less desperate, actually stable. That's a longer timeline than one program cycle. Yes, she said. So build for the longer timeline. He brought that back to Celeste. They were in her office late on a Thursday, the city dark outside the corner windows. She'd been at a medical appointment that afternoon. She had them regularly and scheduled them the way she scheduled everything, with clean blocks in the calendar and no explanation required. And she looked tired in the specific way that had nothing to do with weakness, just the accumulated cost of managing a body that didn't always cooperate. He set the legal pad on her desk. Cheryl says we need a stabilization metric, he said, not just engagement numbers and service delivery counts, whether families are actually more stable 6 months out, a year out. That requires longitudinal tracking, Celeste said. That's a data architecture build. I know. That's 6 months minimum before we have usable numbers. I know that too. She looked at the pad. And you want to do it anyway. Without knowing whether the program creates actual stability, we're measuring activity, not outcome, he said. We're counting people we touched, not people we helped. She was quiet. She turned the chipped coffee mug. There are 43,000 families in active enrollment right now, she said. By the end of the year, it'll be 60,000. That's real. Yes, he said. And I want to know, a year from now, how many of them are more stable than when they came in. I want to know the number honestly, not the number that looks good in the annual report. She looked at him across the desk. In the dark of the windows behind her, the city was reflected. Lights and distance, everything far away and orderly from here. You know what I'm going to say, she said. Write it up, he said. Write it up, she agreed, and there was something in her voice when she said it, not quite amusement, not quite something else, something that existed in between that he'd noticed more frequently over the months, the particular register she used when she was talking to someone she trusted. It was November again, a full year since the diner on Route 9. Sophie had turned 7 in August, the birthday marked by a party at the house they'd moved into in June, a rental in a quieter neighborhood, 3 bedrooms, a garage that Nolan had cleaned out and fitted with better lighting and a proper workbench. 8 kids from Sophie's class, a cake with cinders and storm on it that the bakery had reproduced from Sophie's drawing with impressive fidelity, and Celeste at the kitchen table, helping blow up balloons with the particular focused expression of someone who approached every task, regardless of scale, with full attention. Renata had come down from Pittsburgh for it, and had spent approximately 4 minutes in Celeste's company before texting Nolan from the backyard. She's good. He texted back, I know, don't screw it up. I'm trying not to. Try harder. He hadn't screwed it up. He wasn't entirely sure how to characterize what it was. It existed in that space between friendship and something more that neither of them had named, partly because they were both people who moved carefully, and partly because the working relationship added a layer of complication they were both aware of and occasionally acknowledged sideways. In the way you acknowledge things you're not ready to address directly, but don't want to pretend aren't there. What he knew was this. She called him on Tuesday nights, usually, when she was done with whatever the day had been. They talked. Sometimes for 20 minutes, sometimes for an hour and a half. She asked about Sophie and meant it. She told him things about the company she didn't tell other people. Not as confidences, but as thinking aloud. The way you think aloud with someone you trust will take it seriously. He told her about the field visits, the things he was learning, the places the program was working, and the places it wasn't. She pushed back on him when he was wrong, directly, without softening it. He pushed back on her. It didn't damage anything. It made both of them sharper. He was building something. He was also, tentatively, still figuring out what. The Stabilization Metric project launched in December. The data architecture team called it the Cornerstone Outcomes Framework, which Nolan thought sounded important in a way the actual work had not been. It had been 6 months of arguing about data fields and privacy compliance, and which variables actually measured stability versus which ones just measured the absence of crisis, which were different things. He argued for the distinction until the team accepted it as a project principle. He was in his office on a Friday in late November, reading field reports from the Cincinnati launch, the 9th city, the one he was most concerned about because the community partnership landscape there was more fragmented than anywhere else. when Andrea knocked and came in without waiting, which she only did when something was time-sensitive. "Celeste needs you," she said. "Now." He set the report down. "What happened?" Board meeting got moved up. One of the members called an emergency session. Andrea's face was professionally neutral, which meant it was bad. "It's Martin Cho. He has a proposal." He got to the conference room in 4 minutes. Celeste was already there, at the head of the table. She looked at him when he came in with the clear, level look that meant she was in control of herself and the situation, but was going to need him to be sharp. Martin Cho was at the far end of the table with 2 other board members and a man Nolan didn't recognize. 50s, consulting firm. The unmistakable look of someone brought in to give an opinion that had already been decided. "Mr. Hayes," Cho said. He had a presentation on the screen behind him. "Thank you for joining us." Nolan sat down. He didn't bring the legal pad. He looked at the screen. The presentation was titled Cornerstone Initiative, Operational Review and Restructure Proposal. He looked at Celeste. She was looking at the screen. "The program has expanded significantly," Cho began. "The results have been, in some areas, promising. However, the board has concerns about the pace of expansion relative to the operational infrastructure. The community oversight restructure added governance complexity that increases liability exposure. The proposed stabilization metric framework represents an additional data architecture cost that, in our view, is not yet justified by outcomes we can clearly measure." He clicked to the next slide. "We're proposing a restructure of program leadership, specifically bringing in an experienced nonprofit operations executive to take over day-to-day program management, with Mr. Hayes transitioning to a community liaison role." The room was quiet. Nolan looked at the slide, then at Cho, then at Celeste. Celeste was looking at Cho. Her expression had not changed, still controlled, still level. But he could see, because he knew how to look by now, the very slight set of her jaw. "Martin," she said, "this wasn't on the agenda. I requested the emergency session precisely because the agenda doesn't allow for this conversation," Cho said. "That's not how emergency sessions work." "Celeste." His voice had the careful patience of someone who believes he is being reasonable. "The program is good work. Nobody is questioning that. But the operational complexity has outgrown the leadership capacity. That's not a personal criticism of Mr. Hayes. It's an organizational reality." Nolan set his hands flat on the table. He felt the temperature in himself. Not anger exactly, but something close to it. The specific heat of watching something he'd built being categorized by someone who'd been in a room with it 4 times. "What outcomes, specifically," Nolan said, "are insufficient to justify the stabilization framework?" Cho looked at him. "You said the framework isn't justified by outcomes we can clearly measure," Nolan said. "What outcomes, specifically?" "The 60-day re-engagement numbers in 4 of the 9 cities are below projection." "Below projection by how much?" Cho glanced at the consultant, who said, "An average of 11% across the 4 cities." "Which 4 cities?" Nolan said. "Detroit, Phoenix, St. Louis, and—" "Detroit launched in February," Nolan said. "In February, we identified a coverage gap and redesigned the transport partnership model. That redesign took 8 weeks. 8 weeks of reduced engagement while the infrastructure was being rebuilt. Phoenix had a community oversight election that stalled outreach for 6 weeks because we were doing it correctly, actually getting community input rather than appointing people from the home office." He looked at Cho steadily. "Those aren't failures. Those are the cost of doing the work right. The 60-day numbers in those cities are now tracking above projection. That data is in the monthly report that went to the board 11 days ago." Cho was quiet. "I know the monthly report is long," Nolan said. "I wrote it." Helen Park, at the side of the table, made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Cho looked at Celeste. "The board has a right to evaluate program leadership." "The board has a right to evaluate program outcomes," Celeste said. "Leadership decisions are mine." She said it without heat, without performance. Just as a fact. "I hired Nolan Hayes. I made that decision with full information, and I stand by it. If any board member wants to formally contest my authority to make personnel decisions, that conversation has a proper process, and I'll welcome it in that process." A silence. The consultant shifted in his chair slightly. The two board members flanking Cho looked at the table. Martin Cho looked at Nolan, then at Celeste. Something in his expression, not yielding exactly, but recalculating. The stabilization framework cost, he said, is an investment in knowing whether the program works, Nolan said. Without it, we are a program that helps 60,000 families in ways we can't verify. With it, we become a program that can prove what it does and build on what works. That's the difference between a charitable gesture and an infrastructure. He paused. You built your career on data-driven decisions. I'm asking you to let me build mine on them too. The room was quiet for a long moment. Cho looked at his papers. He picked them up, tapped them into alignment, set them back down. I want quarterly reviews, he said, formal, with outcome data. Done, Celeste said. And I want the stabilization framework to have a defined cost ceiling before it's signed off. Legal and finance will have that to you by end of month, Nolan said. Another silence. Then Cho nodded. Short, not warm, but real. The consultant gathered his materials. The two other board members followed Cho out without making eye contact. Helen Park stood and looked at Nolan. Data-driven decisions, she said. That was good. It was true, he said. Sometimes those are the same thing. She walked out. Andrea closed the conference room door. Nolan sat back in his chair. He looked at Celeste across the length of the table. She looked back at him. You okay? She asked. Yeah. He looked at his hands on the table. Did you know that was coming? I suspected something. Not that specific proposal. And you didn't warn me. I needed to see how you'd handle it, she said. It wasn't an apology, it was the honesty he'd come to expect from her. He sat with it for a moment. The room was quiet, the city outside, the map on the screen with the 28 orange dots. Next time, he said, warn me. Probably not, she said. He shook his head. You're difficult. I know, she said. So are you. That's why it works. He looked at her across the table. The late afternoon light came in flat and honest through the windows. She met his look with the clear, direct regard she'd had since the first night. The look that didn't look away from things and didn't perform looking at them either. He picked up his jacket from the chair back. He had field reports to read and a conference call with the Cincinnati team at 4 and a parent-teacher meeting at Sophie's school at 5:30, which meant he'd be running from the moment he left this room. I'll have the framework cost ceiling to you by Wednesday, he said. Thursday's fine, she said. Wednesday, he said. She turned the chipped coffee mug. Wednesday, she agreed, and there it was again. That register, that frequency that existed between them that neither of them had named yet, and that he carried back to his office and through the rest of the afternoon like something he'd picked up without noticing and now couldn't put down. The Cornerstone Outcomes framework went live in January, 14 months after Nolan's first day at Langford. The data architecture team had built it in 6 months, which was 2 months faster than projected and 1 month slower than Nolan had pushed for, which put the final timeline somewhere in the territory of reasonable. The framework tracked families at enrollment, at 60 days, at 6 months, and at 1 year. Not just whether they'd used the program's services, but whether their housing was stable, whether childcare coverage had held, whether income had improved or at minimum stopped deteriorating, whether the gap had closed or just been briefly bridged. The first quarterly data set came back in April. Nolan was in his office on a Tuesday morning when the lead data analyst, a careful and precise woman named Yolanda, who had the particular quality of someone who would rather tell you an uncomfortable truth than a comfortable approximation, sent the file and then knocked on his open door 30 seconds later. I wanted to be here when you read it, she said. He looked at that for a second. Is it bad? It's complicated, she said. Which is different. He opened the file. Yolanda sat in the chair across from his desk and watched him read. The headline number was 71%. 71% of families enrolled in Cornerstone for 6 months or more showed measurable improvement on at least 2 of the 5 stability indicators: housing, childcare, income trajectory, food security, emergency fund presence. 2 out of 5, minimum. 71%. That's, he started. Better than the sector average, Yolanda said. The comparable federal program runs at 58%. Most private charitable programs don't measure this at all, so there's no comparison data. And the 29%, he said, that's what's complicated. He read on. The 29% wasn't random. It clustered. Single parents working irregular shift schedules, families with a member experiencing a health crisis, families in cities where the community oversight restructure had taken longest, which meant the local partnership networks were thinner. The pattern was not mysterious. It was specific. It was pointing at something. The irregular shift families, he said. The program's service windows don't match their availability, Yolanda said. Case management appointments, document submission, even the childcare referral process. It's built around a 9-to-5 week. If you're working nights or rotating shifts, the program is functionally inaccessible half the time. He set the file down. He sat back and looked at the ceiling, which was what he did when he was thinking something through that he didn't want to half think. He'd known this was possible. He'd suspected it from the Memphis coverage gap logic, that the program's design reflected the schedule of the people who built it, not the people it served. He'd flagged it twice in field notes. The flagging had not translated into structural change fast enough. How long to redesign the service window model, he asked. For which cities? All of them. Yolanda was quiet for a moment. That's not a technology problem, she said carefully. That's a staffing model problem. Extended hours means more staff or different staff configurations. That's a budget conversation. I know, he said. How long if we have the budget? 6 months to pilot in 3 cities. 12 to roll out nationally if the pilot works. He nodded. Write it up, he said, and then caught himself because that was Celeste's line, and he'd apparently absorbed it somewhere along the way. Yolanda noticed. She almost smiled. Already started, she said. He took the outcomes data to Celeste that afternoon. She read it at her desk, all of it, carefully, in the specific focused way she read things that mattered, which was all things, while he sat in the chair across from her and drank coffee and waited. She set it down. 71, she said. And 29, he said. And 29. She turned the chipped mug. The irregular shift piece. We built the program on a weekday schedule, he said. That was a design assumption nobody examined because nobody in the design room worked a rotating shift. Except you, she said. I wasn't in the design room, he said. That was 8 months before I got here. She looked at him. You're here now. Budget conversation, he said. Staffing reconfiguration? 6 months to pilot, 12 to national rollout. What's the cost estimate? Yolanda's working on it. Preliminary is 14% increase in personnel costs for extended hour coverage. 14% is not nothing, she said. No, he agreed. But the 29% is also not nothing. Those are real families who came to the program and didn't get stable, some of them because we weren't available when they could actually reach us. She was quiet. Celeste, he said. I'm not arguing, she said. I'm thinking about how to structure it for the board. Martin Cho is going to want to see the pilot data before he approves national rollout. Martin Cho is going to want to see the pilot data, the cost-benefit analysis, the comparison to alternative approaches, and probably a letter from a consultant, she said, with the dry precision of someone who has managed Martin Cho for 3 years and is not bitter about it, just accurate. Let me handle the framing. I can present it. You can co-present it, she said. I'll set the strategic context. You give them the human reality of the 29%, same as Thursday last year. He remembered Thursday last year, the conference room, the legal pad, Martin Cho's pen stopping, Helen Park leaning forward. Same as Thursday, he said. The board meeting was in May. Nolan brought the outcomes data, the pilot proposal, a cost-benefit analysis Yolanda had finalized, and 3 case studies from the field, real families, anonymized, whose trajectories illustrated what the 29% actually looked like in someone's life. He didn't dramatize them, he just described them plainly. A woman in St. Louis working a rotating hospital shift who'd missed 3 case management appointments because they were scheduled during her sleep window after nights. A man in Phoenix whose childcare referral lapsed because the document deadline fell on a week he was working double shifts to cover a gap in rent. A family in Detroit who'd been enrolled for 4 months and then fell out of contact because every touch point the program had for them happened to exist in the hours they were working. Martin Cho asked about the cost. Nolan told him. Cho asked about the pilot methodology. Nolan told him. Cho asked about failure modes. What happened if the extended hours staffing model didn't produce the expected improvement in the 29%? Then we have data that tells us why, Nolan said, and we try the next thing. Cho looked at him for a long moment. The next thing, he repeated. The goal is stability for those families, Nolan said, not one particular mechanism for achieving it. If the staffing model isn't sufficient on its own, we learn what else it needs. But not trying it, because it might not be enough, is not a position I can defend to the people in that 29%. A silence. Helen Park said, "Approve the pilot." The pilot launched in 3 cities in July: Memphis, Columbus, and Providence, all original pilot cities with the deepest data baseline, extended hours, reconfigured case management scheduling, a mobile outreach unit in Memphis that Darius Webb had been lobbying for since February, and which Nolan had finally found the budget line to fund. He went to Memphis for the launch week. He stayed 5 days, which was 3 more than the official program required. He visited Cheryl on day 3. She'd been tracking the shift worker gap herself for months, and had already informally adjusted some of her center's hours in anticipation. "You're late," she said when he walked in. "I know," he said. "I told you about the shift families in February." "You did." "You're here now," she said. "That's the thing about you, Hayes. You're slow, but you actually show up." He wasn't sure if that was a compliment. He was fairly sure it was the truth. The September outcomes data from the 3 pilot cities showed a 17 percentage point improvement in stability indicators among irregular schedule families. 17 points. It was not a small number. Yolanda sent the file at 7:15 on a Tuesday morning with a single line below it. "I think you should call Celeste before you read the rest." He called Celeste. "I'm reading it," she said when she picked up. "Yolanda told me to call you." "Yolanda is correct." A pause. 17 points. 17 points, he said. A silence that had texture to it. The same texture as the silence after the diner, after the visit, after the board meeting last November. The silence of 2 people who have been building something together, absorbing the fact that it is actually standing. "National rollout," she said. "National rollout," he agreed. It wasn't a straight line from there. Nothing about any of it had been a straight line. The national rollout took 14 months instead of 12 because 3 cities had local labor agreements that complicated the extended hours staffing model, and the Memphis mobile unit required a licensing negotiation with the city that took 4 months longer than anyone expected. Nolan spent more time than he wanted on the phone with city attorneys. He got better at it. He got better at a lot of things he hadn't known he'd need to get better at: personnel management, budget forecasting, the specific political navigation of maintaining relationships with community partners who had legitimate grievances about the pace of change and needed to be heard rather than managed. He made mistakes. He made them with enough regularity that he stopped keeping a specific count and started keeping instead a general orientation toward what the mistake had taught him, which was a more useful relationship with error. He approved a community partnership in Cincinnati that fell apart 6 weeks later because he hadn't done enough due diligence on the organization's governance structure. He'd liked the director personally and let that substitute for the verification it shouldn't have substituted for. He took too long to address a personnel conflict in the Providence regional office that 2 people on the team had flagged and he'd classified as manageable without looking closely enough. He underestimated the political complexity of a city council relationship in Birmingham and had to spend 3 months rebuilding trust that he should have invested in from the beginning. Celeste knew about all of it. She knew because he told her directly, usually before anyone else, in the way you tell someone things when you have established that the truth between you is more functional than the managed version. She pushed back when he was wrong. She supported him when he was right. She made him explain his reasoning in full, even when, especially when, it was a decision she already agreed with, because she believed that the ability to articulate a decision was not separate from the ability to make a good one. "You're teaching me management," he said once. You're teaching yourself, she said. I'm just asking questions. You ask very pointed questions. Yes, she said, I do. They were in her office on a Thursday evening, late, the city dark again outside the corner windows, the place that had become its own kind of geography over 2 years. The desk with the chipped mug, the wall with Sophie's drawings, the side table Nolan had finished and brought in one morning and set against the east wall without explanation, and which Celeste had looked at when she came in and said nothing about except to set her coffee on it and leave it there. The side table with the 4 legs, one different, the repair visible if you looked. She'd never asked where it came from. He'd never explained it. It sat there between them like a lot of things sat between them. Present, unremarked, known. I need to tell you something, he said. She looked up from the file she was reading. I've been offered a position, he said, federal level. The Department of Health and Human Services is building a national single-parent support framework. They want someone to consult on the design. She was very still. It came through one of the city partnerships, he said. The deputy director in Columbus has a contact. They reached out 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, she said. I wanted to think about it before I told you. She set the file down. She turned the coffee mug once. What are you thinking? That it's an extraordinary opportunity, he said. That it would be a 2-year consulting engagement in Washington, minimum, with possible extension. That it would mean stepping back from the day-to-day at Cornerstone. He paused. And that I don't want to take it. She was quiet for a moment. Why not? She asked. Because I'm not finished here, he said. The national rollout isn't complete. The stabilization framework is 18 months into longitudinal data. We don't have the 2-year numbers yet. The irregular shift model is still being refined in 11 cities. Leaving now means handing it to someone who wasn't here for the design choices and doesn't know where the weight-bearing walls are. Those are program reasons, she said. Yes. What are the other reasons? He looked at her across the desk. She looked back at him with the clear, direct regard she'd always had. The regard that didn't look away from things and didn't perform looking at them. You know the other reasons, he said. A silence. A real one, with weight in it. Nolan, she said, not as a preamble, just his name. I know it's complicated, he said. The working relationship, It is complicated, she said. I won't pretend it isn't. She turned the mug again once, the small rotation that meant she was landing somewhere. But complicated isn't the same as wrong. He sat with that. I told the deputy director I needed time, he said. They want an answer by the end of the month. Take the time, she said. But she stopped and started again, the precision thing, finding the exact formulation. If you're not taking it because of the program's operational continuity, that's a legitimate reason, and I respect it, and we plan around it. If you're not taking it because of me, she paused. I need you to make that decision with your eyes open, not as a sacrifice, not as something you do because it's easier than the conversation we're not having. He looked at her. The city was dark behind her. The side table was against the east wall with his coffee ring on it from this morning. What conversation are we not having? He said. She looked at him for a long moment. The one, she said, where I tell you that I have been trying very hard for 2 years to be your employer and your colleague and your friend, and not the fourth thing, because the fourth thing complicates everything. And I built my entire professional life around not letting personal things complicate the work. She held his gaze. And where you tell me that you already know that, and you've been doing the same thing. He had been doing the same thing. Yeah, he said. Yeah, she said. A silence. Different from all the previous silences. This one was the silence of 2 people who have been standing in the same room for a long time and have just finally turned on the lights.